The Peace of Westphalia and Sovereignty in 5 minutes. Part 1, Justifications. Brought to you by Everything Peace of Westphalia. The Peace of Westphalia is known as the foundation of our state system, and in particular of the idea of sovereignty. Almost everywhere you see Westphalia, you see a reference to sovereignty. What do we mean by sovereignty? A sovereign government is one that has authority over its internal affairs. Other governments will not try to tell it how to run its elections, how to manage its economy, or how to administer justice. This is not always true in practice, of course, but it is an accepted principle of international law. In fact, the United Nations Charter mentions near the beginning that it is based on the principle of the sovereign equality of its members. The peace treaties do mention sovereignty at several points. But there is a problem. The word sovereignty is a modern coinage and does not exist in Latin, the language of the treaties. It is derived from the word sovereign, meaning ruler, and ultimately comes from the Latin root super, or above, the same root as soprano. The original treaties do not refer to sovereignty, but to things like supreme dominion, rights of superiority, or superiority in government. So why do people say the Peace of Westphalia established sovereignty? These generally come down to one of 3 reasons, or, since none of them is really convincing, often a mixture of all 3. The first reason is that the Peace of Westphalia enshrined the right of territories in the Holy Roman Empire to decide their own religion. You may have heard this principle described as cuius regio eius religio, whose the realm, his the religion, although that term does not appear in the treaties. So each region was sovereign in matters of religion. Other states couldn't tell it what to do. Elsewhere, the treaties also confirmed the right of imperial estates to govern themselves more generally. It specifically confirmed their territorial right, a phrase which some have taken to be the equivalent of sovereignty. There's a serious issue with this argument, however. The rights confirmed in the Peace of Westphalia were granted to territories within the empire, not to sovereign states. If Brandenburg or the city of Augsburg had the right to establish their own religion and govern themselves according to their own plan, that doesn't mean the treaties were creating a principle of sovereignty. It means that the treaties were confirming a principle of the imperial constitution by which subordinate units were largely independent. It is a principle akin to federalism as practiced in the United States or Germany. American states have a certain right to govern themselves that the federal government cannot interfere in. This doesn't establish sovereignty as a principle of international relations, even if the self-governing principle of the states were to be greatly strengthened from where it is now. The second argument for linking Westphalia and sovereignty is that Westphalia granted independence to the Netherlands and to Switzerland. The actual independence of these countries is quite complicated, but let's grant that they were given independence for the sake of argument. That does not create a new principle of sovereignty in international relations. It merely recognizes 2 new sovereign states. The principle of the state system remains the same. The third argument for Westphalian sovereignty relates to the universalist aspirations of the Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire from the Middle Ages. First of all, the Catholic Church was unquestionably a major factor limiting the sovereignty of kingdoms in the Middle Ages. The Church maintained its own separate administration and justice system within each government. Some popes argued that they could tell kings what to do, and even excommunicated them for disobeying. And it is true that the Church received a major setback at Westphalia. The Pope was so unhappy with the results that he protested it, even though his own representative had helped mediate the treaties. But this has little to do with sovereignty. Popes had lost their power centuries prior to 1648. It was novel to see a pope complaining about a peace treaty quite so officially, but the objections were over concessions to Protestants, and the Church had been dealing with losses on that account ever since the Protestant Reformation. Related to the matter of the Church was the Holy Roman Empire. The emperor was the highest-ranking ruler in Christendom. Yes, they all had ranks, and he had some vague pretenses to govern much of Europe. Arguably, for the emperor to sign a treaty with France and Sweden was an acknowledgement that they were equal, sovereign, and that he had no rights over them. But this was nothing new. Emperors had signed treaties for centuries, and none of them had tried to claim authority over countries such as France for even longer. In the next video in this series, we'll discuss a key reason that Westphalia could not have established sovereignty in international relations, and we'll investigate how it came to be associated with sovereignty in the first place.